But like, yeah, I think there's a lot of with the AAA game industry being in the state that it's in, there is a lot of room for this has been happening for a while. There's a lot of room for like the indie games and then, your double A games to also become really, really popular. Like again, like Baldur's Gate 3, that is a solo published title. If you
Yeah.
want to be pedantic, technically, they're getting funding because it's like an officially licensed D&D thing. But games like Black Myth Wukong, games like Balatro, which is obviously an indie title by itself. There's a lot of really cool games coming out of China, which is actually like that. For a long time, you saw a Chinese developed game and you're like, oh, it's going to be full of microtransactions. And for a long time, that was true.
Yeah, or gacha mechanics, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But with the success of games like Black Myth Wukong, we're seeing a lot of other things where, it's showing that you actually can make a popular single player title based on Chinese mythology from a Chinese perspective, and it's actually gonna like sell well. And I think the reason it sells well is, firstly, obviously, it's a good game, right? Like, first and foremost, it doesn't matter what you want to base your game on. It has to be good. It has to have good game mechanics and has to be enjoyable. But also showing that people want to see something new, because you've got a lot of, when we talk about games with like a East Asian aesthetic, usually that just means Japan. Like, Japan is the only country that exists in that entire region if you look at the history of gaming, with the exception of like one or two other titles. But now that like a lot of these developers are entering the market and not just trying to make mobile cash grab games, there's a lot of cool stuff that I'm really excited for. And that was not something I would have said about like anything a couple of years ago.
Yeah. There's a lot of studios that are seeing the value and respecting the player.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds a bit ridiculous to say, but unfortunately for a lot of AAA studios, they kind of forgot that there's a player at the end of their pipeline that's going to play their game.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly monetary transaction where you're developing a product for a market, hoping to get a return on your investment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to buy a Ubisoft title again in my life. Like, they've lost me as a customer.
Yeah,
For example,
it's
due to
gonna
their
take a
practices.
while.
Yeah. So,
Because I played like when I was a kid, I played Sands of Time, fantastic game. I played the early Assassin's Creed games, fantastic games. But like, again, Ubisoft just doesn't know what they're doing.
yeah, exactly. The new Prince of Persia and the Lost Crown game looks really interesting to me. Still not going to purchase it. I don't want to support Ubisoft. I used to own The Crew. They pulled that away from me because they didn't want to. They don't want to remove the very optional online features that they added
Mm-hmm.
as an excuse to have their game always online. And now the game died because they didn't want to support for the server, which, by the way, is fine. Like, as a game company, you should be forced to support, like, to keep your servers alive. But at that point, either publish the protocol so that the community can actually like take the torch and do support for you, or just remove the online requirements and make it a single player title. Like, do something that allows the game to live on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Ubisoft does not do that. Instead, they decide to pull the rug and say, no, we're done with that game. We're done with the title. Thank you very much for your money. You can't ever launch the game ever again. They've done also like some, personally I think is worse, people who purchased DLCs for Assassin's Creed's title. Once they removed the DRM for that, you couldn't access the DLC content unless you already had it installed. Not on console release because that was tied to the console shops, but for PC, there's a few DLCs for Assassin's Creed that is no longer accessible if you don't have the software already installed. I forget which one.
Brotherhood, Revelations.
Yes.
Maybe it's a couple.
It's a couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, old Assassin's Creed DLC are no longer available. So, what? Okay, AC3 that is part of the remastered version. I'm getting so much conflicting information. I'm definitely seeing Brotherhood and Revelation though. That's so dumb. That's so dumb.
Yeah, it is. it is unfortunate that companies feel they have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It is unfortunate that in most jurisdictions, the law does allow them to do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll see a push from Europe to actually outlaw that, and that's going to force maybe a global change. Unless they want to be petty like Apple and just say, okay, we're just going to change stuff for the Europe market
Yeah.
and everybody else can get screwed.
Yeah, I did see that. For anyone who doesn't know what he's talking about, that's when the EU forced Apple to allow side loading, also known as installing software without using the App Store. They decided to make the change on EU devices. No one else.
Yep.
Which is something like this is the difference between a hardware change and a software change. I talked about the whole USB-C enforcement thing the other day. A software change is a lot easier to make for a single region. Forcing USB-C, like having to make a Euro device and then a worldwide device, like that's a lot harder to do. That costs engineering effort. You need to actually manufacture devices. So that's a lot, like there's a lot more effort in making that happen. Plus, Apple doesn't really lose out on anything if you have USB-C. They do lose out on something if you can install software without going through their store.
Yep. And it's not the first company that did that, by the way. Microsoft also
Sorry,
did
my
that with
dog's
the
barking. You were saying...
Yeah, so it's not the only company that did like changes specifically for the Europe market that was only available in the Europe market. Microsoft also did that with browser choice screens, where if you installed an edition of Windows in Europe, you had to have a screen that allowed you to select an alternative browser. I believe it was part of the Windows N edition that was released in Europe. Maybe I'm misremembering, but it also didn't have like...
Yeah. Had been designated. Oh, it's because they were designated the gatekeeper because of DMA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, when you first did install Windows, you have a screen that allows you to select an alternative browser install. Let's say Firefox, instead of just having Edge pre-installed and set as default by out of the box.
I didn't realize they'd done this. I've heard people say it's, oh, they can't do this. It'd be way too confusing to the user. They literally already have an interface for it.
Yeah. Same thing with Google, by the way. Google implemented the change in the out-of-the-box experience for Android as well, only available in Europe, where you actually select what browser and what stuff that you want. And then
this is the one for the search engine I found. Okay.
Yeah, it's possible for the search engine. Yeah, but they did do one. They did a constant screen on a choice screen on Android as well. And then they turned around and said to US lawmakers that no, it's not possible. It's like going to be too confusing for users. You're already doing it in one region. It's one extra click. It's at some point like there's nothing wrong giving the user a choice. The only reason why you are scared of giving a user a choice is because you don't believe your product is the best. I personally don't think that Google has that fear because the majority of people use Google search. I don't. It's been shit. But for Microsoft, I kind of understand because Edge is just, well...